This is the lecture for Mrs. Rajewski's class on photosynthesis. If you know the equation for photosynthesis, you would know that it takes carbon dioxide and water and makes glucose. That process is basically called carbon fixation. It's a process of building complex carbon compounds like glucose from a simple carbon compound like carbon dioxide. And the organisms that do this, that fix carbon, are called autotrophs because they're using carbon dioxide as a carbon source, combining it with water to make the glucose. Okay, there's a bunch of terminology here. And if you know the prefixes, you should do fairly well. So we already learned autotroph. Those are the ones that use carbon dioxide as a carbon source. And heterotrophs can't do that. Then you have the prefix photo in front of the word. Phototroph would use light. Chemoautotroph would use some type of a chemical or organic compound. And then you have a photoautotroph, which uses light and uses carbon dioxide as a carbon source. Then you have a photoheterotroph, which uses light energy but can't do the carbon fixation. A chemoautotroph is obtaining energy from other sources. And then a chemoheterotroph is using organic molecules as a source of energy and carbon. The main three that I want to concentrate on are photoautotrophs, chemoautotrophs, and heterotrophs. Photoautotrophs are basically your plants, your photosynthetic plants, algae, and bacteria that can gain energy from the light in order to carry out photosynthesis or carbon fixation. They use light energy to make ATP energy and a carbohydrate like glucose. Chemoautotrophs are bacteria, certain bacteria. They use chemical energy to cause carbon fixation and to build structure. And then you have our heterotrophs, which are organisms that gain energy by eating all the other organisms, including autotrophs. And these are your animals, your non-photosynthetic plants, non-photosynthetic unicellular organisms. So because we're dealing with light, we need to talk about the electromagnetic spectrum. It is a complete range of radiant energy. And so you might have learned this before, where our shorter wavelengths are the gamma rays to X-rays to UV light, visible, infrared, microwave, and radio waves, which are the longer wavelengths. And so the ones that we are concentrating on are the visible light, because that's what we deal with photosynthesis. So characteristics of visible light, you should know the order. Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. You should know that red is on the longer wavelength, and it starts at 760 nanometers, and we end with violet, which is a shorter wavelength at 380 nanometers. So that is our range, 380 to 760 nanometers. Tiny packets of this energy is called a photon. That's a very important term. And these photons of light can energize an electron. All right, so electrons can absorb this photon energy, and when they do so, they jump to a higher shell, which means they are going farther away from their nucleus. When they release their energy, they release a photon, and then they'll drop back down to the lower shell. The released photon has less energy than the one that was absorbed. The released photon has a longer wavelength. Light released this way is called fluorescence. Just as a little information about the sun. The sun is a star. It has a very high surface temperature. It produces a vast amount of electromagnetic radiation and of widely varying frequencies, from gamma rays to the far infrared. Okay, so light energy absorbed by electrons in energy-absorbing atoms. This energy causes electrons to change their shells. So they are starting, let's say, on that energy level, and when they absorb, the light comes down from the sun and it hits the electron gets energized and it moves to a higher energy level. It says the more energy absorbed, the farther electrons will move away from the nucleus. This energy may be shed as fluorescence. So it has two different options, basically what's going to happen. It either is going to be emitted as light, as fluorescence light, or it will be accepted by an electron acceptor molecule. Okay, so before we can go more into that concept, we need to get into the leaf structure a little bit. This is a picture of a leaf. Leaves have a layered organization, and you can see there's a mesophyll, which is a middle layer of cells right here, right there. That's where the main site of photosynthesis, because that's where all the chloroplasts are. So the chloroplast is our main organelle for photosynthesis. And you can see there are three basic main parts of the chlorophyll, or chloroplast. You have your thylakoid discs, which are stacked, okay? And these thylakoids are what's going to actually absorb the light, so that's why they're stacked. The more stacks there are, the more light that can be absorbed. The stacks are called grana, or granum. And then the space between all these thylakoids and granum is the stroma, and that's where the enzymes are for photosynthesis. And then you already probably know, but a chloroplast has two membranes, an outer membrane and an inner membrane, and then there is a space between those membranes that is called the intermembrane space. So this slide is just a repeat of what I just said. You have the thylakoid that contains the chlorophyll that absorbs the amount of light, and so that's here. And then you have the grana, which are the stacks. I don't know why that's a box. It should be like a bracket. And then the stroma is the middle fluid, and that contains the enzymes that are going to be needed for photosynthesis. So let's talk about chlorophyll for a minute. Chlorophyll's job is to collect the light energy or absorb it, and it's inside the thylakoid. There's a couple types of chlorophyll. You have chlorophyll A that's going to initiate the one type of reaction. It's called the light-dependent reactions of photosynthesis, and this color in a leaf is the bright green color that you see. Chlorophyll B is an accessory pigment for photosynthesis, and that's like a duller or like an army green. And then you do have other pigments in a leaf, carotenoids. These are the yellow and orange pigments. The yellow pigment is xanthophyll, and the orange pigment is called carotene. All right, so here's the structure of chlorophyll. It has magnesium in the center, and then this is called a porphyrin ring, and that is the part that's responsible for absorbing the light. And so you can see that there's some double bonds involved here. The positive charges on the magnesium ion is what's going to attract the electrons. The electrons become delocalized over the porphyrin ring, so they can stay there for some time, and then they can easily move on. So there are two categories of chlorophyll, the light antenna chlorophylls and then the chlorophylls associated with the reaction center. The light antenna chlorophylls are the ones that are actually going to gather the light energy. When the light hits that chlorophyll, the chlorophyll is going to vibrate, and those molecules are going to move rapidly to the reaction center. In the reaction center, these chlorophylls are the ones that are going to boost the electrons to a higher energy state. So here's just a visualization of the chlorophyll molecules. These are all the porphyrin rings, and so these are the chlorophyll molecules in an antenna complex. So let's say the light hits the chlorophyll. Those molecules are going to bounce and bounce all over the place until it hits the reaction center. And then once it hits the reaction center, then the electron is going to be boosted to a higher energy level. So there are about 200 chlorophylls in an antenna complex, and so you can see how it just bounces around. And it's kind of like a funnel. And then when they reach to the bottom, that's where the reaction center is, where the electrons will be boosted up. Each photosynthetic unit contains a slightly different type of antenna and reaction center. And there are two types of photosynthetic units associated with plants, and they're called photosystems. You have photosystem 1 and we have photosystem 2. Photosystem 1 is also called P700. The 700 refers to the nanometers of wavelength where it's going to absorb its light at. It can operate by itself independently. And then you have photosystem 2, which is called P680, and so that's where it's absorbing its light at, is at 680 nanometers of wavelength. Both of these photosystems are required for photosynthesis. So here's an overview of photosynthesis. It is a redox reaction, so it has reduction and oxidation involved with it. The carbon dioxide is going to be reduced to glucose, and the water is going to be oxidized to oxygen. You should know the full equation of 6CO2 plus 12H2O yields C6H12O6 plus 6O2 plus 6H2O. If you learn the regular photosynthesis equation, normally this would be a 6, and that water would not exist. But technically there is 12 reactant waters on the reactant side. Okay, so when you're looking at that equation, we have two different types of reactions occurring. The light-dependent reactions and the carbon fixation reactions. The light-dependent reactions are going to occur in the thylakoids, and then the carbon fixation reactions are going to occur in the stroma, which is the fluid part where the enzymes are in the chloroplast. So there are two energy carriers of photosynthesis. We have ATP, which is going to carry energy, and then we have NADPH. NADPH is an energy carrier. It's like NADH, which we haven't learned yet. That's in cellular respiration, except it has a phosphated group to it. So it looks like this. You don't have to really know what it looks like, but it does look like that. And notice there is a phosphate group attached to that as well. There's also two different photosynthesis reaction sets. There's a cyclic portion and a non-cyclic portion. In the cyclic portion, it's called cyclic photophosphorylation. The electrons are going to run in a cycle. Chemiosmosis is involved. No glucose is made, and it uses only P700 photosystem. And then you have a non-cyclic photophosphorylation, where the electrons are derived from the splitting of water, and we'll get into this in the second video. It releases the oxygen, it makes ATP energy, and it's making our glucose. It also uses both photosystems, P700 and P680. All right, so we're going to start with the light-dependent reactions in the second video. The light-dependent reactions, here is a summary equation of what we're going to do. We're going to take some water. We're going to take a molecule called NADP+. We're going to use 18 ADPs and 18 inorganic phosphates. And at the end of the light-dependent reactions, we're going to have 6 oxygens made, 12 NADPH, which is an energy molecule, and we're going to make some ATP as well. And so this will end the first part. Please move on to the second part.